Hi guys! I'm going to be doing this video a little bit differently because when I was reading through and making the vocabulary list for this next chapter of the book, I noticed there were like twice as many vocabulary words as there normally are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the vocabulary words before I read the chapter because I have to scroll. That's how many vocabulary words there are. So we're going to go through the vocab words first, and then I'm going to read the chapter. I also wanted to do this because the book is starting to pick up a little bit. So yeah, I'm going to start sharing my screen so that you guys can see all my vocab words. Okay, so like I said, there's a lot of them, but this chapter is not very long, which was a little bit funny. So that's why I wanted to go through this beforehand. So the beginning of the chapter, the first word is ideal. Ideal just means an idea of something in its perfect form. So if something is ideal, that means it's the best that it can be. Also on page 47, scrutinizing means to look at closely and carefully with attention to detail. So a lot of detectives scrutinize scenes, right? They're looking really closely at something. Simultaneously means existing, happening, or done at the same time. So when you and your friends say the same thing at the same time, you're saying it simultaneously. Sufficient just means enough. So if you say like, this amount of food should be sufficient for my family, it should be enough food to feed everybody. Hastened. Okay, this looks like it should say hastened, but it actually says hastened. Just means to move or act with speed or to hurry. Gloated. So to gloat means to feel or show great pride or satisfaction, often when someone else does badly or fails. So gloating is not a nice thing to do. Basically just means bragging when somebody else fails and you succeeded. Not a nice thing to do. This one is a big word, gesticulating. Okay, so gesticulating means to make hand movements, especially so as to be more emphatic or expressive while speaking. So if someone's gesticulating while they're talking, that means they're moving their hands. They're, trying to paint a picture with their hands and their words. Big talker. Portentous means exciting, fear or wonder, ominous or marvelous. So even that definition has a lot of big words. And this one actually was a little bit tricky for me when I was reading this in the book. Basically, what I've come to understand that it means is it's used to describe someone's facial expression. So someone has a portentous frown on their face. It kind of means that he is worried. So ominous means like you have a feeling that something bad's about to happen, but you don't know what it is yet. That's kind of what that I am imagining in my brain. That's what his facial expression looks like. He looks worried. He thinks something bad is about to happen. He's kind of thinking a lot, but not in a good way. Let's see, page 50. So we're about halfway through now. Palatial. Okay, and this one I'd never heard this word before, but when I read the description, I was like, oh, that makes sense. It just means of, resembling, or relating to a palace. Palace, palatial. So if something looks palatial, it just means it looks like a palace. Exterior just means the outside. So every building has an interior, which is the inside of the building, and an exterior, which is the outside of a building. Resemblance means the condition of being or looking alike. So two things resemble each other. They look the same. Eccentric, not behaving or thinking in an ordinary or accepted way, odd or peculiar. Eccentric is usually used to describe people. People who are eccentric are just a little funky. They act kind of weird. Page 51. We're almost to the end now. Unbecoming means not attractive or proper on a particular person. So if you're wearing something that's unbecoming, it just means it doesn't look good on you. Reputed means generally supposed or assumed. So if something is reputed, it basically means lots of people think that, but they don't know for sure. It's just what most people assume about something. Grudging means not want to give or allow. Okay, so if someone grudgingly accepts your offer, that means they didn't want to, but they did. Chauffeur is a person whose job it is to drive a car around. So rich people have chauffeurs. That means they have someone whose job is to just drive them around everywhere. Assent means agreement, approval, or consent. So if someone gives their assent to do something, it means they're giving you the okay. They're saying, yep, go for it. Page 53, consternation. That's another big word. It means surprise and alarm, leading to panic, deep disappointment, or total confusion. Okay, so I mean, when you have consternation, you just learned something crazy and you're like, oh my goodness, and then it leads to a bad feeling. You're either panicking, you're disappointed, or you're just confused. And our last word is absurd, which just means silly, foolish, not true. Usually it's used to describe something that you know for a fact is so obviously ridiculous. Okay, like if I were to say, oh, I have big purple wings. That's just absurd. There's no way I have big purple wings, and you can see that. It's very obvious. Okay, so I know that this is a big long list of words, and that's why I kind of went through them before I decided to read the chapter. So this video is going to be a little bit longer, but I think it will help us to understand the chapter better. I'm going to try to remember to scroll when I get near the end so you guys can see all the words as I'm reading. So yeah, I'm going to start. We're on chapter 6 now. Okay, so let's see. One of the Hardy boys, it looks like, yep, Joe Hardy just found a clue that hopefully will lead them to find Chet's missing car. Okay, this is called The Robbery. Joe Hardy quickly led the way into the swampy area as the other boys trooped along, everyone talking at once. When they reached the spot, Chet examined the tire and exclaimed, "There's no mistake about it! This is one of the tires. When the thief put on the new one, he threw this away." "Perhaps the Queen is still around," suggested Frank quickly. "The thief may have picked this road as a good place to hide your jalopy until he could make a getaway." "It would be an ideal place," Chet agreed. "People coming to Willow Grove have to park at the gate, so nobody would come in here. But this old road comes from the main highway. Let's take a look, fellows." A scrutinizing search was begun along the abandoned road in the direction of the highway. A moment later, Frank and Chet, in the lead, cried out simultaneously, "Here's a bypath, and here are tire marks!" Frank exclaimed. To one side was a narrow roadway, almost overgrown with weeds and low bushes. It led from the abandoned road into the depths of the woods. Without hesitation, Frank and Chet plunged into it. Presently, the roadway widened out, then wound about into a heavy clump of trees. It came to an end in a wide clearing. In the clearing stood Chet Morton's lost jalopy. "My Queen!" he yelled in delight. "Her own license plates!" His shout was heard by the rest of the boys, who came on a run. Chet's joy was boundless. He examined the car with minute care, while his chums crowded around. At last, he straightened up with a smile of satisfaction. "She hasn't been damaged a bit, all ready to run. The thief just hid the old bus here and made a getaway. Come on, fellows, climb aboard. Free ride to the highway." Before leaving, the Hardys examined footprints left by the thief. "He wore sneakers," Frank observed. Suddenly, Chet swung open the door and looked at the floor of the car. "You mean he wore my sneakers? They're gone." "And carried his own shoes," Joe observed. "Very clever. Well, that washes out one clue. Can't trace the man by his shoe prints." "Let's go," Chet urged. He jumped into the car, and in a few seconds the engine roared. There was barely sufficient room in the clearing to permit him to turn the jalopy about. When he swung around and headed up the bypath, the boys gave a cheer and hastened to climb aboard. Lurching and swaying, the car reached the abandoned road and from there made the run to the main highway. The boys transferred to Tony's truck and the motorcycles and formed a parade into Bayport, with Frank and Joe in the lead. It was their intention to ride up to the police headquarters and announce their success to Chief Collig. "And I hope Smuff will be around," Chef gloated. As the grinning riders came down Main Street, however, they noticed that no one paid any attention to them, and there seemed to be an unusual air of mystery in the town. People were standing in little groups, gesticulating and talking earnestly. Presently, the Hardys saw Oscar Smuff striding along with a portentous frown. Joe called out to him, "What's going on, detective? You notice we found Chet's car?" "I've got something more important than stolen cars to worry." "Hey, what's that?" Detective Smuff stared blankly as the full import of the discovery filtered his consciousness. The boys waited for Smuff's praise, but he did not give it. Instead, he said, "I got a big mystery to solve. The Tower Mansion has been robbed." "Oh my goodness," the Hardys said. Tower Mansion was one of the show places of Bayport. Few people in the city had ever been allowed to enter the place, and the admiration which the palatial building excited was solely by reason of its exterior appearance. Okay, that was a mouthful. Basically, what that sentence is saying is that the reason that a lot of people are really interested in this place is because it looks like a palace, but it's actually just a house. Okay, but the first thing a newcomer to Bayport usually asked was, "Who owns that house with the towers over on the hill?" It was an immense rambling stone structure overlooking the bay and could be seen for miles, silhouetted against the skyline like an ancient castle. The resemblance to a castle was heightened by the fact that from each of the far ends of the mansion arose a high tower. One of these had been built when the mansion was erected by Major Applegate, an eccentric, retired old army man who made a fortune by lucky real estate deals. Years ago, there had been many parties and dances in the mansion. But the Applegate family had become scattered until at last there remained in the old home only Hurd Applegate and his sister Adelia. They lived in the vast, lonely mansion at the present time. Hurd Applegate was a man about 60, tall and stooped. His life seemed to be devoted now to the collection of rare stamps. But a few years before, he had built a new tower on the mansion, a duplicate of the original one. His sister, Adelia, was a maiden lady of uncertain years. That means they don't know how old she is. Well-dressed women in Bayport were amused by her clothes. She dressed in clashing colors and unbecoming styles. Hurd and Adelia Applegate were reputed to be enormously wealthy, although they lived simply, kept only a few servants, and never had any visitors. "Tell us about the theft," Joe begged Smuff, but the detective waved his hand airily. "You'll have to find out yourselves," he retorted as he hurried off. Frank and Joe called goodbye to their friends and headed for home. As they arrived, the boys saw Hurd Applegate just leaving the house. The man tapped the steps with his cane as he came down them. When he heard the boys' motorcycles, he gave them a piercing glance. "Good day," he growled in a grudging manner, and went on his way. "He must have been asking Dad to take the case," Frank said to his brother as they pulled into the garage. The boys rushed into the house, eager to find out more about the robbery. In the front hallway, they met their father. "We heard the Tower Mansion has been robbed," said Joe. Mr. Hardy nodded. "Yes, Mr. Applegate was just here to tell me about it. He wants me to handle the case." "How much was taken?" Mr. Hardy smiled. "Well, I suppose it won't do any harm to tell you. The safe in the Applegate library was stolen. The loss will be about $40,000, all in security and jewels." "Whew!" Frank exclaimed. "What a haul! When did it happen?" "Either last night or this morning. Mr. Applegate did not get up until after 10 o'clock this morning and didn't go into the library until noon. It was then that he discovered the theft." "Well, how was the safe opened?" "By using the combination. It was opened either by someone who knew the set of numbers or else by a very clever thief who could detect the noise of the tumblers. I'm going up to the house in a few minutes. Mr. Applegate is going to call for me." "I'd like to go along," Joe said eagerly. "So would I," Frank declared. Mr. Hardy looked at his sons and smiled. "Well, if you want to be detectives, I suppose it is about as good a chance as any to watch a crime investigation from the inside. If Mr. Applegate doesn't object, you may come with me." A few minutes later, a foreign-make, chauffeur-driven car drew up before the Hardy home. Mr. Applegate was seated in the rear, his chin resting on his cane. The three Hardys went outside. When the detective mentioned the boy's request, the man merely grunted assent and moved over. Frank and Joe stepped in after their father. The car headed toward the Tower Mansion. "I don't really need a detective on this case," Hurd Applegate snapped. "Don't need one at all. It's as clear as the nose on your face. I know who took the stuff, but I can't prove it." "Who do you suspect?" Fenton Hardy asked. "Only one man in the world could have taken the jewels and securities. Robinson." "Robinson?" "Yes, Henry Robinson, the caretaker. He's the man." The Hardy boys looked at each other in consternation. Henry Robinson, the caretaker of the Tower Mansion, was the father of one of their closest friends. Perry Robinson, nicknamed Slim, was the son of the accused man. That his father should be blamed for the robbery seemed absurd to the Hardy boys. They had met Mr. Robinson on several occasions, and he had appeared to be a good-natured, easygoing man with high principles. "I don't believe he's guilty," Frank whispered. "Neither do I," returned his brother. What makes you suspect Robinson? Mr. Hardy asked her to Applegate. He's the only person besides my sister and me who ever saw that safe opened and closed. He could have learned the combination if he'd kept his eyes and ears open, which I'm sure he did. Is that your only reason for suspecting him? No. This morning he paid off a $900 note at the bank. It's like a loan, so if you owe the bank money. So he owed $900, and he just paid it off today. And I know for a fact he didn't have more than $100 to his name a few days ago. Now, where did he raise $900 so suddenly? Perhaps he has a good explanation, Mr. Hardy suggested. Oh, he'll have an explanation, all right, sniffed Mr. Applegate, but it'll have to be a mighty good one to satisfy me. The automobile was now speeding up the wide driveway that led to Tower Mansion, and within a few minutes stopped at the front entrance. Mr. Hardy and the two boys accompanied the eccentric man into the house. Nothing has been disturbed in the library since the discovery of the theft, he said, leading the way there. Mr. Hardy examined the open safe, then took a special magnifying glass from his pocket. With minute care, he inspected the dial of the combination lock. Next, he walked to each window and door to examine them for fingerprints. He asked Mr. Applegate to hold up his fingers to a strong light and got a clear view of the whorls and lines on the inside of the tips. At last, he shook his head. A smooth job. A smooth job, he observed. The thief must have worn gloves. All the fingerprints in the room, Mr. Applegate, seem to be yours. No use looking for fingerprints or any other evidence, Mr. Applegate barked impatiently. It was Robinson, I tell you. Perhaps it would be a good idea for me to ask him a few questions, Mr. Hardy advised. Mr. Applegate rang for one of the servants and instructed him to tell the caretaker to come to the library at once. Mr. Hardy glanced at the boys and suggested they wait in the hallway. It might prove less embarrassing to Mr. Robinson that way, he said in a low voice. Frank and Joe readily withdrew. In the hall they met Mr. Robinson and his son Perry. The man was calm but pale, and at the doorway he patted Slim on the shoulder. Don't worry, he said. Everything will be all right. With that, he entered the library. Slim turned to his two friends. It's got to be, he cried out. My dad is innocent. And that is the end of chapter 6. Right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this chapter, and I will see you next time for chapter 7. Bye.